All right, welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about Benny Safdie's new film, The Smashing Machine, starring Dwayne Johnson. This film was definitely one of my most anticipated of the year. Like a lot of people, I came to know Josh and Benny Safdie through Good Time, which just knocked me flat when I first saw it. It felt like a true announcement, like here are these guys who are going to matter in the world of cinema for many years to come. And sure, they'd made films before that, but Good Time was the one that hit a lot of people like a debut. And then, of course, they followed it up with Uncut Gems, which went even bigger. That one was kind of inescapable, right? We all remember the meme.
I mean, I was Josh Safdie's muse when he wrote Uncut Gems.
It became this cultural moment for sure. And once again, it just wrecked me when I saw it. That movie felt like having an anxiety attack stretched across 2 hours. So when you have those two films as the calling card, there's a certain expectation when you see the name Safdie attached to anything, which is why I was a little excited and a little nervous when I heard that they were splitting up, at least temporarily. Benny started showing up in a lot of acting roles like Licorice Pizza, Oppenheimer, The Curse, all good stuff, but look, you never know what happens when a duo splits up. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Looking at you, Ethan Coen's Drive Away Dolls. So yeah, I had a little apprehension, but I'm happy to report that in my eyes, this movie's a success. It's got some head-scratcher moments, sure, but for the most part, it feels like Benny Safdie planting his own flag as a filmmaker, and I'm here for it. The Smashing Machine tells the story of Mark Kerr, played by Dwayne Johnson, a rising mixed martial arts fighter navigating the turbulent early years of his career between 1997 and 2000. As he pushes himself to compete at the highest level, Kerr relies on pain medication to endure the physical toll of fighting, unaware of the addiction quietly taking hold. The film explores the collision of ambition, addiction, and the fragility of personal relationships, particularly with his girlfriend Dawn, played by Emily Blunt, whose own struggles with sobriety and intense emotions intensify their fraught connection. From the makeshift infirmaries and backstage corridors of MMA matches to the intimate, volatile moments at home in Phoenix, Arizona, the story captures Kerr's battles both inside and outside the ring, culminating in a public and personal reckoning of his career, his love, and his identity. So, right off the bat, let's just say it, let's just get it out of the way. This is a movie that drags Dwayne Johnson into the awards conversation. People have been joking about it for months, ever since the trailer came out. Oh, imagine The Rock doing Oscar-worthy work. But the truth is, he kind of does it here. About 5 minutes into this movie, I stopped seeing Dwayne Johnson, and I started seeing Mark Kerr, the real-life UFC fighter that he's playing in this movie. And that's not easy to pull off, especially when you're one of the most recognizable people on the planet, and double especially when your screen persona has been pretty fixed for over a decade. Now, I just want to take a little retrospective detour here because I've never been one of those people who thought that Dwayne Johnson was just a big slab of muscle with no range. I always thought that he had more in him. I remember seeing him far back in Gridiron Gang. I don't know if anyone remembers that movie. Back when I was probably in middle school. I don't think I had seen him in a movie before that. I'd only known him as a wrestler. And yeah, the movie's kind of like a stock coach inspires troubled teens thing. But I remember thinking, oh, this guy has something. And then he started making some weird choices, like Southland Tales, which is one of the strangest movies out there, and stuff like The Rundown and Walking Tall, which I'd honestly call guilty pleasures. But then after that, he sort of detoured into Family Fare with The Game Plan, Race to Witch Mountain, Tooth Fairy, and then boom, Fast Five. And that movie kind of totally reinvents him as this mega franchise guy. But the one that always stuck with me, and I'm sure has stuck with a lot of people watching this, was Pain and Gain, where he teamed up with Michael Bay and gave this bizarre, hilarious performance that I still think is one of his best. After that, though, it was a lot of the same brand. Tight shirts, raised eyebrow, smirking, quipping, tough guy, big franchises, big blockbusters, and that's fine. But you could always tell that there was more under the surface. And here, with Benny Safdie and the Smashing Machine, he finally gets a chance to show it. Now, look, if you're expecting another Uncut Gems or Good Time, this isn't that. This is slower, more subdued. It has some of that chaotic, anxiety-inducing Safdie energy in moments, but mostly It's shot like a documentary, almost voyeuristic. Sometimes it feels like you're spying on the characters from across the room with a long lens, catching these raw, intimate little slices of life. I remember thinking a lot throughout the movie. I was like, this feels like a slice of life movie. It's a departure from the Safdie style that people might expect, but it really, in my opinion, works for this story. So let's talk positives first. Obviously, Dwayne Johnson's performance is number one. The way he plays Mark Kerr, it's all about the contrast between the giant exterior and the fragile interior. There's a fight early on in this film where he injures the guy in the ring, and instead of celebrating in his corner, he's immediately yelling at the ref to check if the guy is okay. That's who this character is. A guy who looks like he should be invincible, but is in fact the most vulnerable person in the room. The real drama of this film isn't about whether he'll win or lose the fights. It's about whether he can reconcile who he is with what he does and whether he even wants to. While we're talking positives, Emily Blunt is another highlight. At first, I wasn't really that into her character at all. She sort of came across as this one-note toxic girlfriend, always picking fights, always pretty needy, always nagging Mark Kerr. At some point in the movie, there's a pretty big fight scene between, like a domestic fight scene between Dwayne Johnson and Emily Blunt. At one point, some lady in my theater just goes, "Bitch." And when she did that, I was like, yeah, that's a pretty appropriate response to the way that this character is acting in this scene. But I was worried that that characterization was going to be the extent of it. But then, little by little, you start to see more dimension to the character. And her final scene, which I kind of just alluded to, and I'm not going to spoil here, I was kind of floored by what Emily Blunt was doing. There's a realism that she brings to it that hit really close to home. Like, without going into too many personal details, I've known people like that character. I've been in situations like the ones depicted in this movie, and it's bracing to see it captured on screen in such an unflinching way. Another thing I appreciated was the way this film portrays the fighters. There's this brotherhood, this camaraderie, even when they're literally punching each other's faces in. You see it in the locker room. You see it between Mark Kerr and other fighters like Mark Coleman. It adds this tenderness to a world that usually just gets portrayed as brutal. And speaking of which, shout out to Ryan Bader, who plays Mark Coleman. He's a real UFC fighter, and I thought that he was going to be in like one or two scenes. But no, he's a major presence in this film, and he truly holds his own next to Johnson and Blunt. Bas Rutten is another one who shows up playing himself in the movie, and he's great too. The soundtrack and the score of this movie deserves a special mention. The score builds tension really well, and the needle drops land hard. There's an Elvis version of My Way that is also in the trailers for this movie that just sort of nailed the scene that it was in. And I've got to say, the late 90s, early 2000s vibe feels spot on. Everything from the costuming to the lighting to the production design really kind of dropped me in that world, and I never for once doubted that what I was watching was from the late 90s, early 2000s. And real quick, I want to mention that the easiest way to get me genuinely anxious in a theater, like edge of my seat, palms sweating, is not actually horror, it's not thrillers, it's not even most war films. Those could do it sometimes, sure, but the most reliable way is a fighting story. Boxing, MMA, even wrestling, if there were more of those. Something about the structure of a fight, the rhythm of rounds, the finality of a knockout, it's just built to get under my skin. This film really reminded me of a movie called Warrior, that Gavin O'Connor movie with Joel Edgerton and Tom Hardy and Nick Nolte. I haven't seen it in years. I should probably revisit it, but that was one of the earliest movies I can remember actually making me cry. It totally leveled me. And then you've got movies like The Fighter, Southpaw, Creed, Ali, Million Dollar Baby. Oh, and there's this little film from the 70s called Rocky. You might have heard of it. These movies are basically cheat codes for getting an emotional reaction out of the audience. Put two people in a ring, raise the stakes, and you've already wired in the tension. And this film is no different. By the end of it, I was definitely nervous, like actually feeling the pressure of the moment. The comparison to Warrior feels especially apt, not just in its tone, but in the way that the last act is sort of structured. You think you know where it's headed. It's set up like it's going to give you the same cathartic sports climax, but then it sidesteps that expectation. Again, I'm not going to spoil it. This is a spoiler-free review, but the way it refuses to go for the obvious ending makes the whole thing more unsettling. It doesn't give you the release valve like most fight movies do, which is frustrating in one sense, but in another sense, It's what makes this film stick and stand out in this sort of wealth of other sports dramas. Now, on to the critiques, because while I like this film a lot, there are definitely things that didn't work for me all the way through. And the first thing is the fight scenes, which feels weird to even say because you'd think in a movie about mixed martial arts fighters, the fights would be the centerpiece. But honestly, they don't hit the way that they should. A lot of them are shot with this shaky camera where the camera kind of jitters around the arena and cuts right as a punch is supposed to land, or it'll duck behind someone's shoulder so you don't really see the impact. And that does a couple of things. One, it kind of robs you of the visceral thrill of seeing these huge guys collide into each other. You never really feel the weight of it. And two, it ends up making the fights feel like background noise instead of the moments where the whole movie should be holding its breath. And there's a part of me that's certain that that has to be intentional. Maybe Benny Safdie doesn't care about the spectacle of the fighting and just wanted to show what it feels like on the periphery. But I think even if that's the choice, it could have been more effective because without that physical payoff, the drama sometimes drifts out of my mind. And adding to that, the sound design of this film and the sound mixing of this film, at least in the theater that I saw it in, felt kind of overall thin, like the low end was missing for a majority of the movie. You want those hits to sound like they're shaking your rib cage. You want the crowd noise to swallow you whole. But instead, it kind of felt flat, almost like I was watching the fight on a TV with the volume down. And in a film like this, I think that that's a problem. The second thing, and this might be a bigger one, is the structure of this movie. After a while, you start to notice a pattern. There's a fight, and then the fallout, and then an argument with Emily Blunt, then training, and then repeat. And it doesn't take long before you see the beats coming. It's not that those scenes are bad. A lot of them are great in their own right, but strung together, it just gets repetitive. And the issue with repetition is it keeps the story from building momentum. If you think of something like Rocky or Warrior or Creed, those films know how to escalate the tension. They start smaller, they build the stakes, they stack the emotion, and by the time you get to the final fight, you're standing up in your seat. But here, it never really crescendos. It just kind of circles back on itself until it trails off at the end, which, sure, is probably closer to how life actually works and how it worked in this particular story. Life doesn't always build to a climactic showdown, but as a drama, it can leave you feeling like the air kind of leaked out of the balloon instead of popped. And then there's the scale of this film. On paper, this is a story that stretches across countries, Japan, the US, but in practice, it feels weirdly small. Most of the movie takes place in just a handful of settings: the house, the gym, the arena, a press conference. And after a while, that starts to flatten the world of the movie. Like, you know how in a really good sports film, you could feel the enormity of the stage, the city, the fans, the media, the whole cultural weight pressing down on the athlete? You don't really get that here. It feels insular, more claustrophobic, which could have been interesting if it felt intentional, but to me, it just felt limited. And some of the interiors in this movie don't help either. I know I commended a lot of the production design, but there are some production design choices that, I don't know, let me just explain. The house that Mark Kerr and his girlfriend, Emily Blunt's character, live in felt like it was a sitcom set. It's like you're watching a couple have a knockdown, drag-out fight about their relationship, and the room looks like it's lit and designed like the set of Friends. I don't really know how to describe it. I just didn't really feel like they were shooting inside of a real house. It felt like they were shooting on a set built on a soundstage. And that mismatch pulled me out of the film more than once. Now, all of this might sound harsher than I actually mean it, because the truth is, I don't really think that Benny Safdie was ever trying to make a conventional sports film. If he wanted to do Rocky, he'd do Rocky. What he's doing here is something different. He's peeling back the curtain of a guy who should be larger than life and is showing how fragile he really is. The fights aren't really the point. The fights are just the backdrop for the real battle, which is entirely internal. And that's why, even with this film's flaws, I still found the film fascinating. It just sometimes left me wanting more in areas where I think it could have hit a little bit harder. Now, I should mention, there was a question that kept nagging at me while I was watching this film. Why are we being told this story? Why Mark Kerr specifically? Because if you strip it down to the beats, this is a story we've seen a dozen times. A fighter at his peak of his ability, knocked down, dealing with substance abuse, fighting to hold on to relationships, fighting to hold on to himself. That's Rocky. That's The Fighter. That's Raging Bull. That's half of the sports movies ever made. So what's different here? Why was Benny Safdie drawn to this? Why did Dwayne Johnson want to tell this story so badly? And the answer, or at least the answer that I came away with, is that Mark Kerr's story isn't about greatness achieved and lost. It's about greatness barely within reach and slipping away before he even had a chance to hold it. It's not a rise, fall, redemption arc. It's more of a story about what if the rise never quite happened. Mark Kerr, from what I understand, was foundational. One of the guys who helped invent and popularize this thing that we all take for granted as the UFC. But he wasn't a household name. I'm young enough to the point where I don't remember a world where the UFC didn't exist. But there was a time when it wasn't around. And telling this type of story is compelling in its own way because it turns the spotlight on someone who history might have left in the margins. It's a story about fragility more than triumph, about how even giants can be crushed before the world ever really notices them. So yeah, The Smashing Machine was one of my most anticipated films of the year, and it mostly delivered. Dwayne Johnson is transformative, Benny Safdie proves that he can direct solo, and I'm beyond curious to see Josh Safdie's Marty Supreme later this year. Hopefully they reunite, but if not, 2 Safdie films in 1 year, I'll take it. As a sports film, it doesn't hit the highs of Warrior or The Fighter or even Rocky. But as a character study of a man who looks invincible but isn't, it's really strong, and I highly recommend it. But what did you guys think? Let me know down in the comments if you've seen The Smashing Machine and what you thought of it. Do you think that I'm hyping up Dwayne Johnson's performance too much? I could foresee people thinking that, but I really did think that he's doing something special in this movie. Let me know down in the comments. And when you're done with that, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell to be notified when new videos come out on this very channel. Go follow me on Letterboxd to see what I'm watching, when I'm watching it, and I'll see you all next time.